What's good with it in the hood with it? Welcome back to the Collective Clips where you already know we get it in. But before we get it in, let's hit that like and subscribe button. Put your notification bell on all so that way you're directed in the directions of the dope content that I'm kicking. And I highly appreciate all the support. We're going up on this channel and it's all because of you. A lot of you guys asked me to touch on this subject that I'm about to touch on, man. Who was Charles Manson and why was he able to program on certain yards in the California prison system? You want to talk about it? Let's go. Let's get it. So a lot of people ask me questions every day in my lives, and one of the questions that popped up yesterday was, how was Charles Manson able to do his time in the California prison system if it's so dangerous? If it's such a dangerous place, how was he able to maintain and stay alive until ultimately his death in the year 2017, right? How was he able to do that? Gun, you talk a lot of masa about the California prison system being the hardcore place that it is. So how the fuck did he wiggle? Well, I'm going to answer those questions right now, right? Because a lot of people that are on the Danny Masterson tip want to know why he can't, how come he can't function, but Charles Manson could. Well, let me explain to you this. First of all, before we say anything, Charles Manson never had a weirdo case. Okay, he never had a sexual deviant case. He never touched on anyone. Was he touched? Well, that's up for debate, right? But he never had a sexual case. He was in for basically directing murders, what they say, right? We all know about Helter Skelter. We all know about Charles Manson's case. If you don't know, man, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis, a little bit of a run through. Charles Manson was convicted and ultimately sentenced to the death penalty in the California system for being associated or involved with 9 murders that took place. Okay, the Tate Bianca murders, where they said that he had a cult, and being the leader of this cult, that he had direct communications with these individuals, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and several others that committed these violent and heinous murders in the Los Angeles area. Now, that's up for interpretation. Whether you believe someone can make you do something or manipulate your mind or brainwash you into doing a murder on their behalf is totally up to you and your ways of thinking. Myself, Charles Manson was a criminal. Okay, Charles Manson, this was not his first rodeo. When he was convicted, you need to understand, I think in Charles Manson's whole lifespan, besides being a very small child, as an adolescent all the way to an adult, he probably was out 3 or 4 years, period. And that's an accumulation, that's a total. He grew up in the youth authority system. He grew up in YAs and camps and facilities and placements. He went straight to in and out of incarceration, doing life on the installment plan, and then ultimately ended up succumbing and dying in prison, in Corcoran Prison, right? In the PHU, the Protective Housing Unit. But we're going to get to all that. How was he able to maintain? Well, first of all, he had a criminal mentality, a convict's mentality. See, the youth authority and being locked up as a kid prepares you for prison. See, when I went to the youth authority, we never thought about our time. We never tripped on our time, didn't care when we were getting out. We knew as soon as we got out, we were going to get straight to the bricks and straight to the program. Straight to kicking it with the homies, to gang banging, to smoking, to yoking with 4 doors open. That's what we were going to do. At least that was my mentality and those that were around me. We never talked about getting out and getting a job, getting out and being a productive member of society and using delayed gratification skills to obtain the things we wanted in life. Hell nah. We wanted to get out, get some pussy. And we were going to get out and get right into the game. The dope game, which was pretty prevalent in them times. And the gang banging, which was always an issue, especially with knuckleheads like ourselves that were already in the mix. So that was our whole forte. That was our whole get down. Those were our small-term and short-term and long-term goals. Okay? And a lot of us achieved those. Within a year, half of the population that was incarcerated in the youth authority was dead. The other half was doing life in prison or life on the installment plan, like myself. I chose door number 3, and thank God I did, because I was able to facilitate some type of mental change and get away from all that. Charles Manson was the exact same way. He grew up as a kid in these facilities. So he was prepared for prison. Then as he became an adult, he started going in and out of these facilities. And an old school convict's mentality is they can deal with anything. They've seen it all. They've done it all. They've been through it all. Now, Charles Manson didn't have an easy road in prison. People like to believe that he was in protective custody his whole time, kept away from general population, and that, he was protected somehow. Now, that did happen in the later years, and I'm going to tell you why that happened. So when he first got to prison, he was placed in a prison called Vacaville. Okay, Vacaville has always been known as not a soft yard in the state of California in the prison system, but it wasn't a yard where it was anyone worried about it. I know that it was an NF stronghold for a long time in the 80s and 90s, but it became a medical facility, or always was a medical facility. A lot of people that were cancer patients had a lot going on with their prostates, things of that nature, because they were set up with the wrong individual. Daddy Masterson, Vacaville, here you come one day, right? This is where they placed a lot of those guys. So there was a lot of guys that had medical conditions, conditions that they already had going on, and this is the place where they were put. That's one thing about the California system. There's places that have drug programs. There's places that are medical facilities. There's places that they'll put, that's where a lot of the guys that are transitioning, the Caitlyn Jenners, the Masterbatersons, they put a lot of them in Vacaville because that is a prison that gives you the shot and they're facilitating chi-chis, right? That's just that. So this is where Charles Manson was placed in the 80s. In 1984, he got some beef. Now, a lot of people like to talk about the he said, she said, and the hearsay of, there was a prison hit on him and this is why he got lit on fire. No, absolutely not. In 1984, he was lit on fire in the day room by a guy named John Holstrom. And the guy lit him on fire over an argument over religion. See, this guy was into the Hare Krishna religion and Charles Manson was into himself, right? And somewhere along the line in that day room, they had an argument, which happens in prison. A lot of guys don't see eye to eye on certain things. And it could be something as easy as politics or religion. It always sparks off some treacherous shit. That's why, having been a convict, having known, I don't like to speak on politics and I don't like to speak on religion too much because that always goes left when it should have been right. The right frame of mind, the left way of thinking. It's ugly, right? So they had a conversation and they had an argument. And this guy decided that if for no other reason, he was going to fucking take Charles Manson out. So he threw a cup of paint thinner in his face, threw a match. They said the only thing that protected Charles Manson was his raggedy ass, scruffy ass beard he had. Boom, 10 seconds, the flames went up. A lot of the other convicts turned him out, drug his ass to the fucking, the medical area, and he was right? So there was never no hit on him per se, people trying to kill him. Again, man, this guy was on general population. He was never a sex offender. See, if you're just in for murders, conspiracy to commit murders, which Charles Manson was, and we could debate all day whether he was guilty or not guilty. There's advocates still even fighting for his innocence, even though he's passed now. That's up for you to think. Okay, I myself know that his hand was heavily involved in something. The motherfucker thought he was Jesus, right? He thought he was, and I'm going to tell you the backstory on what led up to that. What I think created that crazy mind of Charles Manson, right? He's so notoriously known, they put him above of the Night Stalker, above of Ted Bundy. And this is someone who never killed anyone, allegedly. This is someone who never was really hands-on involved in the gruesome murders, yet he's classified higher ranking than these guys that killed 30, 40, 50 people. It's a trip. It's always tripped me out. As a kid, man, I remember hearing about Charles Manson in the Helter Skelter movie. I watched it and thinking, wow, this guy's the devil himself. But really, in all reality, he was just a confused person that had mental disabilities. He had some 5150 JCat shit going on. He was supposed to be in the EOP building. That's it. So he gets lit on fire. Whatever the case, they transfer him to San Quentin. He was sitting in San Quentin on that general population yard. And you ask, how was he able to facilitate maintaining on that yard when so many people looked at him as a trophy? Because yes, in this case, because of his case and the high notoriety of it, and because there were women that were killed, innocent pregnant women involved, again, child killers, right? They don't get no play. They're right there along fucking Masterbaterson. They're in between Wes Watson and Masterbaterson. Wes Watson being not a weirdo, but likes fucking fists in his ass. And then, of course, you got Masterbaterson over here, who is. He's right there, classified in between them because there was a baby that was dug out of a woman. And it's just an ugly situation in the scene. I don't need to describe. We all know that, the Tate murder. Now, because he was involved, even if he was behind the scenes, people said that he sent them to do that. That's why he was ultimately convicted of conspiracies to commit murders. Now, I don't understand why he never got let out on the board hearing, other than I think because of the notorious nature of who he was. They knew that it just wasn't a good look to put him out in the general public. The guy played the mentor role, but was actually a genius. If you look at it, he was a smart individual. Now, again, I'm not condoning what happened, and because I wasn't the cucaracha under the huaracha or the cockroach on the wall to tell you exactly what happened. If he made these people go out and do what they did, if he brainwashed them to think that there was going to be a racial war, so they decided to do this. From everything I've read and heard, it was copycat murders where they were doing murders. They had a friend that was incarcerated, so they figured if they went and facilitated these murders, it would look like there was still a serial killer out there doing these things, and maybe that will help their homeboy and impact their homeboy's appeal. That's the truth of it, right? All this, they were trying to start a race war, and Charles Manson was directing traffic. I don't know that to be true, but I don't know it to be false either, so I can't speak on that. This is the truth. When he gets to San Quentin, the word on the curb is he was paying the heavyweights to protect him. He was paying for protection because, albeit he wasn't a weirdo, he was a trophy because there was a baby involved in his case and innocent women. And that automatically made him a target. What is a trophy in prison? We've talked about trophy for a few days now when we talked about Danny Masturbatorson. What a trophy is someone's case, man, who is, it's a notorious case. It's national news. It's well known. Someone that has money, someone that's an actor, a singer, a rapper, but they have a lot of money, a lot of dough. There's people in there that ain't got nothing, and they're waiting on people to get in there with those high notoriety cases so that they can fucking bash their shit in and take what they have. Or they could extort them, or they could fucking, act like they take them under their chicken wing, man, but then pluck their shit. That's just how it is. Of course, Charles Manson was one of those. But the difference with Manson is he came from a different era. He knew the game. He was a convict. He could tell. He was aware. He could tell when motherfuckers were coming at him. They couldn't twist him up. You couldn't run game on someone who was a con man himself and who was used to running game on others. So he knew better, so he did better. What he did was he chose to start paying, for protection. And the word on the curb was he was paying the AB as well as the Hells Angels for protection in the 80s. Now, the 80s compared to nowadays is very different. See, back then, it was more about gang banging and racial things. There were vatos that were getting took out left and right. Murders were occurring in prisons in the California prison system daily, every single day. But this was about the time that the administration was slamming back active gang members, validating them, slamming them back. Vatos from the big four organizations as well as the associates. They were all getting slammed and identified at this time. Then you started to go into the 90s where there was a big influx of gangs on the streets that started to go into the California system and reignite the guerra, the wars. That's why every content creator, everyone, you always hear them talk about the 90s, the 2000s, and even now, and the 70s. But a lot of them skip the 80s because the 80s is an unknown era. That's an era when they were all getting slammed back and wasn't a lot of shit going on. There was, but there wasn't. We didn't hear too much about it because in the 80s, man, there was twists and turns. And Charles Manson was there for all that. Okay? Charles Manson knew, so he was paying for protection. In San Quentin, somewhere around the mid-80s, he was stopped paying. Guess he felt he didn't have to do that anymore. Guess he felt that because of who he was and because he had gained some friends on that yard, that he'd be all right. You ain't never all right, right? If you're told to pay today, you better pay tomorrow and 10 years from now and 15 years from that, because vatos don't forget. See, even when dudes parole or die in prison, your debt or what you're doing just continues on to the next homie. There's always another homie pulling up that's going to be like, hey, bro, and it doesn't matter if you're wood, a brother, north or south, you're going to pay, humps. They're going to be like, see that right there? You know, that right there pays 50 every week. I like Zuzas and Whammans. It's up to you, whatever you want. Frauzito. Get what you can. And if he doesn't pay, throw his ass off the tier. And that's exactly what happened in San Quentin. They snatched him up, beat him up, and tried to throw him off the tier. Now, from what I've heard of a couple different stories that he actually was thrown off the tier. But I don't think he'd have been walking the way he was. I think he'd have been fucking doing the same old two-step like fucking 50 Cent, right? I'm going to be honest with you. Whether that happened or it didn't, it might just be a myth. Because there's a lot of myths when it comes to Charles Manson. A lot of people that tell fake and fraudulent stories just to gain views or attention. To be totally honest with you, man, I don't know if that ever happened, but that was a myth that was thrown out there. What I do know is there was all-point bulletins put on him. There was a green light put on Charles Manson. His protection was lifted. So, of course, after going through prison, and yes, he didn't have it easy. People seem to think that because they only hear about him and see him on, Barbara Walters and see him with Diane Sawyer and all these different interviews Geraldo he was doing back in the days. But in the meantime, in between time, he was really in prison living. He was really going through the motions on a mainline facility in general population. A lot of assaults, a lot of assaultive behavior. And he got crazier and crazier. We're talking about taking a guy with already a mental history and putting him into a place that can mentally drive you insane. Because anyone that goes to prison, it's not a sane place. There's a lot of sane individuals, but I've seen a righteous, solid camarada, homeboy. I mean, someone you would think like, hey, this Vato got a great head on his shoulders and I seen it explode right in front of me. And next thing you know, this Vato's eating shit in his cell. Shit sandwiches. It happens. People lose their minds because they don't have a strong mentality. You may think so on the exterior, but in the interior, they're crumbling. Whether it be a family member, a mother, you lose a parent, man, that does crazy shit to you because you're not able to be there for them. And then you always have to live with that in your life that you could have protected them, but you didn't or couldn't, right? And that eats at people. Not being in your children's lives. Your old lady over there boning the next door neighbor. Big black dudes over there like, like P. Diddy and Meek Mill. It's crazy, right? I'm just saying, any one of those things or just even within yourself can turn you insane, right? So it's an insane world. There's a lot of shit that you see that desensitizes you to what you would see on the streets. Not the average everyday motherfucker walking their dog sees about to get stabbed 30 times in the face and the neck area. It just doesn't happen. But in prison, it happens continuously, and you got to be able to step over that and go get your sack lunch because you're hungry. See, it becomes a thing where you matter more than anything else. That's why you become desensitized. Charles Manson lived that life for so long, knew that life, did it his whole life. That's why he was able to maintain. See, not everybody's built from prison. They're not cut from that cloth. This guy was. Now, whether you choose to like him or dislike him because of some of the things he said, there's no denying he was an old school convict. Somewhere along the lines in his time, what happened with Charles Manson was that he was gifted a present. Unwrap that shit, bitch. Well, what is it, right? It's the PHU. He was put in the protective housing unit in Corcoran State Prison, right? In Old Corcoran. Now, I've done time in Old Corcoran on the level 4 yard, and I can tell you right now, that shit is Fort Knox. That is 4A right. That building right there, right? Nobody gets into unless you get into. This is where I ultimately think Danny Masterson will end up if anything else happens to him. But we'll just have to breathe on that and see on that, right? But Charles Manson was gifted after so many assaults and so many assaultive behaviors that were displayed. They told him, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to put you finally in the protective housing unit. Now, again, he was sentenced to death row in the beginning, but it was commuted and overturned to life sentences. So Charles Manson, because he was shot down so many times, because he gave up on the world or the world gave up on him, which is unfortunate if this Vato was ultimately innocent. Again, I'm not saying he's innocent or not. I'm just saying, after a while, I think when a person becomes old, you give them a chance at life. Give them a breath of fresh air at least one time in their mind. Unless they're a weirdo, chirujo or something. Not a chirujo. You even give the chirujo time. But a weirdo, a chomo, pedophile, that, yeah, bye. Bye-bye. Hasta la fucking fuck you, right? That's it. But in Charles Manson's case again, man, besides that baby being dug out of that body, he didn't do that. But they're saying by proxy, he was incarcerated for that. It's a bad look. Sorry, Charles, right? But he was placed in the protective housing unit. What is the protective housing unit? I've done a video on it. Refer to the Gunner Handbook and the Gunner video of PHU. Protective housing unit is the top of the top when it comes to guys that need to be protected because of the notorious cases that they have, because they're just so heinous and violent. Their cases, these guys, there's about 30 to 40 of them. No one knows the true correct number. They're thrown in this one facility, one unit in Corcoran Prison in all the state. That's high security level. Such a high security level that not even certain cops know the codes to open up doors. I've heard so many different stories about it, and it's crazy. It's a place that not very many of us would make ever in our lives, or not very many of us want to go. These guys are a fraternity of the worst, probably individuals on the planet Earth. Some of them, okay? There's a lot of guys that escaped that title, but they should be there. Anyways, this is where he was housed until ultimately in 2017, he died. He died of colon cancer, man. He was rushed to the hospital with intestinal bleeding. He was released from the hospital in Bakersfield because they took him from Corcoran to Bakers. He was released back to his facility. Within 6 days, he was back at the hospital, and then he succumbed to his death, right? And that's just how his life played out. So how is he able to wiggle through life in prison, but Danny Masterson and others can't? Well, it's simple. He knew prison. Prison knew him, and he knew prison. See, with Danny Masterson's case, he's new. He's a new booty. Yeah, it's wet. Oh, wet behind the ears, sucker, right? He's new. So everything is new to him. What does canteen mean? He doesn't even know what that, slowly but surely he's going to understand, and you start to get a grasp on what it really is, the realities of prison, the hopelessness, the desolation, the boredom, the incarceration. You'll get a grip on that in any system. But until then, he's learning everything new. Laundry on Wednesdays, right? He doesn't know what is the roll. Well, it ain't the fucking shit you put jam on, homie. It's the shit that's a towel and a shirt. There you go. Get your roll. He's going over there like, they said you guys are serving rolls. Yeah, bitch, here. Raggedy ass roll he gets, right? That's just how that is. Charles Manson knew a lot of these things. He was around when these big four prison gangs were implemented, when they started. He was doing time pre the big four. He was doing time back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, all the way into his death. So this man became a fixture or a staple of prison. His name is synonymous with prison. And if you really look into the extension of his life, he did his whole life in prison. Now, he was able to be out just for a little while, a couple years. And in that time, he put this cult together, or became a leader of a cult in San Francisco, and ultimately ended up doing all these murders in Los Angeles. Now, why did he do this? Where did he lose his mind? I think it stems from a traumatic childhood. But also what I think it stems from is, here's a story that nobody knows. He was a songwriter. He was a songwriter, man, and he was heavily into music. He was on the cusp of becoming someone, but just wasn't too talented, but did know how to write songs. Somewhere along the line in the early, I think it was 70s or 80s, he ran into, it was the 60s, it had to be, because he got locked up on that case in the 70s. But he ran into one of the Beach Boys, and he wrote a song, and the Beach Boy liked it. Took it, twisted it, flipped it, changed the name of it, gave him no credit. And I believe that this ultimately drove him crazy, that he was getting shit on in the industry. And he flipped out and formed this cult and kept a lot of women around him because that made him feel good about his ego. And ultimately his rants and ravings, because he was going crazy, leaked off into them. And because they were so infatuated with this persona, they decided to do what they wanted to do. Again, I implore to you, I think this case was a copycat case where they were doing it to facilitate some type of avenue for an appeal for their friend that was locked up for murders. But it's their story. I'll let them tell it. Anyways, that's how Charles Manson was able to live. That's how he was able to survive in California prisons. Everybody's story is different. How was I able to survive? Because I was with the Northern Fashion. See, because I was part of a group segment with the homies, automatically it was hands off with everyone unless it was that time. I had backup. I had homeboys that backed my play. I knew when I went in there I wasn't alone. Albeit there wasn't a lot of us on the yard, I still had homeboys to turn to share comida with, to sell up with, to run game with, to do our thing. And when you have a couple homeboys, and I understand every man needs to stand on his own 10, his toes, and be ready for whatever, because ultimately you take that conviction by yourself, you're going to get out by yourself. But while you're in there, while you're in prison, it's always cool to have a helping hand and homeboys to lean on. That's just what it is. Anyways, Charles Manson might not have had that, but what he had was a strong mental, and he was able to live. That's how he did it. Will others like Danny Masterson and these weirdos make it? I don't know. Again, you ask, how was SPM in the Texas system able to make it all these years? There's a lot of different stories. Oh, he paid, or he's paying, or he was in protective custody. I don't know his story, and I don't fucking care enough about him to really look into it. But what I do know about him is if he does get out, man, is he going to have to worry more about the streets than in there? Sometimes the streets become more of a hindrance to a convict's program. I had a homeboy that every time he got on the streets, he went right back to prison, and then he was in his zone. I'm in my zone trying to make $150, SC 150. He was more comfortable being locked up. It's a cold game, but once you get to that point and you're institutionalized, that's just what it be like. So anyways, man, Charles Manson is dead. He died in Bakersfield, California, right outside of Corcoran, and that's just what it is, man. How was he able to live? Not comfortable. Believe me, he went through his shit. And I don't wish that upon no one. With that being said, move smooth with a purpose. Get everything that you want coming. And remember, at the end of the day, it's all about the strive, the struggle, the struggle, the strive. I got a double banger coming up later on. Pay attention. It's a good one, man. I'm going to give you guys some real righteous knowledge you can't get in college. With that being said, thumbs up or thumbs down. Heavy's going to be the head that wears the crown. I'm going to continue to strive, struggle, struggle, strive for what I honestly, truly believe in, man. And that's giving you guys the real game. No sugarcoating or added preservatives, man. Let's bring the people together so we can sit down and get entertained by the gun. Bang, bang. Like and subscribe.